Hello, welcome back. Thank you for joining me again. I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. And I am in chapter 2, the second half of chapter 2. So I'm just coming back from my break, and now I'm reading chapter 2, the second half of chapter 2. So sit back and finish enjoying as I read the stories to you. Okay, home at last. To make a very long story short, I headed to Tibet, using any means that would get me there, from hitchhiking to freights to camels, a story in and of itself. When I got to the outskirts of Tibet, guides associated with our order snuck me across the border and led me to the monastery. Communist China had already invaded, and troops had to be avoided at all cost. The monastery was in an isolated area of the Himalayas that was considered forbidden, even to Tibetans. Other than those of our order, no human had ever even stepped foot there until recently, when some daring and hardy explorers finally discovered the area. As we got closer to our destination, I was shocked to find that we were entering a warmer, wetter area. Most of the Himalayas are stark, frigid, and barren. And here I was in the midst of these great frozen giants surrounded by thriving warm region, plant life, and how beautiful it was. Finally, the day arrived when my quest would come to an end. All of a sudden, there it was, the place my heart and soul had dreamed of. It was beautiful and strikingly unique. The pyramids, domes, and cubic structures created such a unique artistic and otherworldly symmetry. I'd never seen anything like it. Seeing it from a distance, I was stunned, thrilled, scared, awe-inspired. Hundreds of feelings rushed through me, like the waters of the powerful waters nearby, of the powerful falls nearby. As I approached the monastery, I noticed many small buildings. I noticed many small buildings all around the outside of the walls. I found it interesting that the people inhabiting them and working around them were not all dressed in Tibetan fashion, but rather they wore the garbs of various cultures. Most notably, they were all very warm and friendly, welcoming me with smiles. With their smiles. Immediately upon reaching the entrance of the monastery, I was greeted by a bright, friendly female monk. I discovered she was to be my liaison, and initially a kind of orientation tour guide. "Come in," she said. My name is something unintelligible to me. She saw the complex look in my eyes and grinned. That means Eastern Star in English. I must have looked how I felt, which was, that's one of a heck of a handle to call somebody by. She looked at my eyes kindly and said, "Just call me Anastasia. That's my old name. My parents were from Russia." I was in such a state of awe about finally finding what I had hoped for all my life that I was speechless. So while I thought to answer her, I remained silent. "As you may know, we have been expecting you," she said. "I'll show you around and initially answer any questions you might have." Questions, I thought to myself. I have more questions than I can probably ask in my lifetime. She took me by the hand and began to show me the grounds. Thank you, I finally managed to find part of my tongue. Like she said, they were expecting me. And it was obvious from the guides and others who met me along the way that they also knew the timing and path of my journey. I didn't understand exactly how they knew it all, but I figured I'd find out later. For now, I was more interested in the reactions I was getting or not getting from the other monks on the ground. Some were obviously working, some doing yoga like techniques, and others appeared to just be sitting and hanging out. Many of them stopped and stared, while others seemed to be ignoring me. It just seemed sort of cold, sort of odd to me at the time. So I asked about it, and the people who were living just out the monastery. You'll find out later about the people who live near the monastery, but to answer your questions about the monks here in the monastery, it's just the timing of your arrival. Author's note, I later found out there was more to it than that. We are all very busy, and those you see here, pointing to the group who seem to be ignoring me, are doing special long meditation exercises that require deep concentration, and if they would have to start over again if they stopped. Even lost their concentration or even lost their concentration. She smiled and said, although I noticed some of them lost their concentration anyway. Then I caused more of a stir than I thought, I said. You'd be surprised. You'll get a chance to meet everyone later. But why don't I just show you the grounds for now? Sure, on with the tour. But I've got to tell you, I've come farther to get here than Disneyland, so I hope it's worth it. Disneyland? She spoke perfect English with an American accent, so I'd assume she was familiar with Disneyland. Well, I'll tell you about it later. You probably won't believe me anyway. Oh, yes, I will, she said with a cute, innocent enthusiasm. I could tell you I could have some big fun pulling her leg. Anastasia, you speak English perfectly. Those of us who were raised here are multilingual. But even the monks who weren't raised here learn at least English or Spanish, in addition to their native language. If it is something other than that, monks who have come here from all over the world, some are also fluent in many of the various languages spoken in most parts of the world, even ancient languages. Those of us who were raised here are multilingual, but even the monks who weren't raised here learn at least English or Spanish, in addition to their native language, if it is something other than that. Monks have come here from all over the world. Some are as fluent in many of various languages spoken in most parts of the world, even ancient languages. You can learn any language here you wish. I'm having a hard enough time with English at the moment. How many languages do you speak? Only 7 modern languages. Oh, only 7? That's too bad, I said jokingly. She didn't get my sarcasm and just nodded in agreement. As Anastasia was taking me to her first stop on my tour, I began asking many questions about the architecture. Be patient. You can't learn everything in one day anyway. You'll find out everything you want to know later. When? I don't know. Tomorrow, next year, a decade. Whenever you do, you will have. Her unrevealing, complex, perplexing answer to remind me a bit of the short time I'd spent earlier at a Zen monastery. Those Zen monks certainly love their paradoxical questions and answers. I didn't know it at the time, but I would discover far more paradoxes here and then eventually come to understand them. Finally, the radiant young woman showed me to a room where a monk was speaking to a group of other monks. There were many adepts who could help you grow here. Of course, I know everyone can teach you something, even life itself is a teacher. She pointed at the man who was speaking to the others. He is my special personal true teacher, and has also been like a father to me, especially since my parents are no longer with us on this plane. He helps me change and grow. How does he help you change? He helps me see and understand myself clearly, and thus I can change things about myself that I wouldn't have ordinarily even see. How does he do that? And what does true teacher mean? You love asking more than one question at a time, don't you? There's just so much I want to learn. I understand. I was just teasing you. I should probably answer your second question first. The adept or initiate monks, like him, are also what we call the true teachers. That's because they have transcended their own selfish and self centeredness and archived what we call universal consciousness. Many different spiritual traditions have their own name for achieving that. Some call it achieving Satori, some call it nirvana, some illumination. Some, like us, refer it to as enlightenment or initiation. Whatever you call it, it is a transformation that creates a total change in their viewpoint and way of life. That brings us to your first question. Because of their broad universal consciousness perspectives, their unselfish love and lack of selfishness, they thus see everything, including people, very objectively, purely, and clearly. So, they see things about yourself that you don't see yourself. Or even things you block or hide inside yourself and bring them up to you. Thus, you can use them as a sort of a tool to see yourself clearly, see things you want to change, and then change if you want to. Only the adept monks are what you call true teachers, then? Yes. They are basically three kinds of monks in our order. Novice and elders are still essentially students. The adept or initiate monks are more like personal growth facilitators or therapists. Why don't you use the term true teacher instead of just master or teacher or guru or something like that? Why do you use the term true teacher? Because it's accurate. It also avoids labels that are sometimes associated with ego or lack of humility, and at the same time separates them from just an ordinary teacher. Many people and things can teach you, but A true teacher is a specific type of teacher. They're true in the sense of accuracy or lack of distortion, like a true arrow. In that sense, it's just like a true mirror is best for seeing your body or face rather than an untrue mirror with imperfections that would distort your reflection. Like I said, their teachings or telling you about yourself is pure and true. Because of the objectivity, they have archived from not being contaminated by or subject to their own selfishness anymore. So, rather than thinking about themselves all the time, as most people do, they aren't self centered or defensive. Because their unselfish consciousness, they don't have anything to personally gain or lose in dealing with you or to get in the way of their objectivity about you. So they just think and care about you, your best interest, and the best interest of all others. And they can tell you what they see from the great higher, broader, more loving perspective if you ask for their help or opinion. The room where this true teacher monk was given a talk was lit only by candlelight, so I couldn't see his face very well. But when everyone went outside to do an energy exercise, I saw it clearly. It was the man I saw on TV. I didn't know it at the time, but he would soon be the most important person in my life. While some part of me rejected, some part of me cringed. Excuse me, some part of me rejoiced, some part of me cringed. I didn't know why at the time. I just knew he was somehow frightening me, like staring death in the face. Later, I would realize it was because of his ability to confront me and show me myself, which my selfish, self-centered ego strongly wanted to avoid. Because of that, I would do everything I could to avoid him for a while. But there was an even stronger draw I had towards him, towards something about this man. That would eventually lead me to ask him to be my special mentor, also my personal teacher. I didn't know his name yet, but soon I heard one of the other monks there call him Zain. My head was reeling. I had to remind myself that this wasn't a dream. It was another world. One that I thought only existed in my imagination just one long year ago. Outside in a courtyard, Zain and over 100 people formed a circle, holding hands with arms outstretched between them. They were about to do an energy technique called the star exercise. I had read about this years ago in a very old book. I read by an author whose last name was Ledbetter or something similar. The book was about what he called the Great White Brotherhood in Tibet, and it described them doing something called the star exercise during a festival called Wesak. But many of the particulars were never mentioned in the book, and the author's stories also indicated that the people were as inaccessible as any myth. So while the book fascinated and attracted me in many ways, and his description of the people sounded like home, it left me with nothing I could further pursue. Now I found myself living it, the real thing. Anastasia ushered me into position in this giant human chain that formed the circle and gave me quick instructions. And then it began. I closed my eyes, and as a feeling of lightheadedness came over me, my head and body were buzzing with energy. I thought I was perhaps starting to black out. Yet all I saw was fluctuating white light. It seemed as if I was experiencing a million thoughts and pictures all in a moment's time. As I opened my eyes, I saw energy vibrating in all things. And the people there, everything was flashing with white light superimposed over it. Apparently, I wasn't the only one experiencing some dramatic effects from this star exercise. A novice monk had come to join in the exercise a little late and muttered some kind of admonition and stood alone outside this. Okay, let me back up. A novice monk had come to join the exercise a little late and stood alone outside the circle. He collapsed and laid there as if lifeless. I heard Zayn mutter some kind of admonishment about being dangerous to stand outside the circle. Then he said loudly, "One has left the body. He has become lost. I must retrieve him." And in a few moments, the body of the collapsed novice twitched, and he returned to consciousness. Afterwards, Zayn sat in the side courtyard garden for a sort of question and answer session. My apologies, I lost my space. Okay. Afterwards, Zayn sat in the side courtyard garden for a sort of question and answering session. I was still vibrating with energy and seeing it everywhere. I wanted to tell him about my experience, but was simultaneously afraid to say anything to him or bring attention to myself. But I did. And that is a story we'll save for a chapter later in this book. Anastasia then started walking over to me in the monastery's residential area. I didn't know what to expect. I had studied other monasteries and had even visited and spent time in some. In monasteries that teach or utilize constant asceticism, asceticism, as a primary spiritual growth tool, the monks' quarters are often called monks' cells, because that's pretty much what they were. Little tiny jail-like cells, like what you might find in a prison. Of course, to the monks who choose that kind of path, their cells were a voluntary part of their training, not a means of imprisonment and punishment by a government. But in any case, I didn't even like the ideal of dormitories, let alone cells. I would later learn to drop such personal preferences in favor of adapting and flowing, but I wasn't there yet. On our way over, I asked Anastasia about the living situation with nervous, introverted concerns. "So, what do you have here, monk cells or dormitories?" Except for temporary aspects of a monk's training, learning self-discipline, and special transition training, which I was about to come face to face with, Our way of life is quite moderate and even luxurious by standards, especially by other monastic standards, at least as a general rule. That's nice to hear, but you didn't exactly answer my question. I especially don't like dormitories. Well, they are, and they aren't. You'll see. When we finally arrived at the monk's residential area, I was quite relieved by what I saw. Although it was naturally odd, like most everything else around here, these are the private sleeping, living, and meditation areas, she said. I expressed my relief to Anastasia. I have to admit, this is far nicer than what I was expecting. Yet, it is rather bizarre. I was surprised I was surprised to find an odd honeycomb of private rooms. And while the quarters Anastasia was showing me was far smaller than the monks' quarters of many other orders, oddly enough, they were very cozy and comfortable. In fact, there was no compromise to the dark, dank, cold harshness of the traditional monk cell. They were beautifully decorated, had curtains, pillows and mats, sheets and quilts, little combinations, shelf, altar, storage areas, incense burners, candles, even lights. But they were tiny. They're pretty tiny rooms, Anastasia. That's true, but they're tall enough to sit up, read, and meditate in, and long and wide enough to lay down in. They serve as both our personal quarters and places for our solitary meditations. Even for someone my size? Sure. And actually, they're quite comfortable and cozy. In fact, we call them wombs instead of rooms because they're so cozy. They're kind of like a womb. Cute. The wombs were an ingenious architectural design and concept. They were much like honeycombs. Their efficient design would allow many of them to fit into what would be a normal sized bedroom for someone in the US, but more importantly, they were moderately designed. So if you had a mate or family, wombs could be instantly connected and expanded as needed. And as it turned out, they were extremely cozy and comfortable. And I never found them lacking as either living quarters or meditation chambers. But I was in for another surprise. So, which one of these is mine? I asked. Novices don't get one right away. I later found out that was just to put novices through tests and changes that created personal growth. Then where do I sleep? I said with a bit of a surprise and stress. See that pile of mats over there? When you are through for the day, just go get one and find any place you can to lay down. My stress jumped up a notch, but I immediately got a grip on myself. What the heck? After what I'd lived through, even that would be a luxury. What I didn't know at the time is there was a deliberate shortage of mats, and it was first come, first serve. I made that surprise discovery that night when I couldn't find any more mats. Okay, now I was an unhappy camper. But in time, I learned it was all part of a series of tests and growth techniques that everyone like myself went through on this path. and the rewards were far greater than sacrifice. Note, I eventually got a 5-unit womb with a view. After the wombs, she brought me to the library. I was astonished. It was vast, the largest building I had seen yet. This is our library. Where do I get a card? I asked. She looked at me quizzically. I don't think we have any cards, but we have many, many other things to read. She wasn't kidding. And she also wasn't kidding about many other things to read. Texts, scrolls, tablets of every description were here. The important literature, philosophy, and religious teachings from cultures all over the world were at my fingertips, including various ancient and modern translations in most languages. There were even texts about cultures that had no written language. I felt I could spend the rest of my life just in here. No, I could spend lifetimes. Where did all of this come from? It was collected over time. We also have original texts from most religious teachings, including the biblical, in their original handwriting. I was in heaven. She had to drag me out of there to continue our tour. Anastasia eventually took me to a relatively small meditation room compared to the hall I had seen earlier. This is where elder monks teach classes for novice monks. Elder monks were ones who had learned and grown a great deal but still had not achieved total unselfishness or total enlightenment. But even so, they had a lot to offer and were far nicer people that I had ever met. They were as good as saints, from my perspective and consciousness at the time. What kind of courses do they give? Each elders teach courses in meditation techniques, basic spiritual principles and their applications, history, and conduct some limited personal growth sessions. I would be spending most of my time learning and getting counseling from elder monks during my first few months at the monastery. The entrance to this meditation room had a very short door, and I had to bend over in order to get in. Why is the door so short? I asked. It obviously had been custom built, and the room itself was as big as a large living room. By building the door so it physically requires those who enter the room to bow, it meant to symbolically remind both elders and novices to be humble and have respect and compassion for all. A class was about to begin, so she advised me to stay there and begin my first course. Am I a monk now? I asked. That's up to you. This is a monastery and only monks stay here. I assume that's why you came. I hope I didn't overstep my boundaries with my assumption. No, I do wish to stay, learn, and grow. I guess I'm just accustomed to people not being so sensitive and having to sign up for everything, even getting your car lubed. Well, I don't know about you getting lubed, but you will need to ask the head monk if you can stay. However, we've already discussed you, and he also assumed you would be asking to stay considering. She briefly paused mid-sentence, as if she almost slipped up and told me something she wasn't supposed to. But she immediately spoke on and has already indicated your acceptance. So, what kind of monk am I then? A student, novice, elder, frat brother, or what? I just joked. Novice. You need a teacher to be a student. And you need to be a student to be a teacher. I wasn't quite sure what she meant by that. She was going zen on me again. Well, will I see you later? I said. Of course, dear. We live together now. I didn't know exactly what she meant by that either, but I figured it wasn't the same thing as it meant in the outside world. When will I see you again? And please don't say maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year. She touched my shoulder lovingly and said, I'll be by as soon as the class is over, okay? Okay. There were about a half a dozen other English-speaking novices in the room, new and relatively new students of various stages. And I got my first taste of what would be many courses. Even though these courses were not given by the teacher who were enlightened masters, I was totally impressed by the wisdom, kindness, and compassion of the elder monks who conducted them. I learned all kinds of things in various courses, including ancient teachings, the religions of the world, meditation and energy techniques, yoga, etc. But sometimes the elders just spoke spontaneously about things other than what the course was about. And when they did that, I was floored by what I thought were their psychic abilities. It was as if they were reading my mind, picking up on my every thought, answering my unanswered questions, and finding my hidden secrets. Then discussing them all out in the open to free me of my inner burdens. It was kind of like getting indirect therapy. It seemed like every word was just for me, but I couldn't understand how this could be happening just for me when there were other novices in the room at the same time. I wondered if they were having the same experience. I later found out that it was not a psychic thing that was happening, at least as we know it. It's not simple to explain. It's covered later in chapters, though. But the elders who were giving courses were doing a meditation technique of sort, get out of their own way, so to speak, in order to really be in touch with us and to be conduits for what we needed to hear. They didn't really even consciously know themselves what we were thinking or why they were saying what they were saying, but the effect was the same. By the time the session was over, I was so exhausted, I was about to drop. Anastasia met me as I came out the door, but I was too tired even for her. So I bid her good night, but instead of reciprocating, she was silent. When she finally left, though, instead of saying good night, she said, get a good rest. Later, I found out that the reason she didn't say good night wasn't because get a good rest was the local customary phrase, but because good night was just a subconscious habit phrase of mine that had thus become only meaningless, parroted phrase rather than a meaningful statement or statement of caring. In other words, saying good night probably originally came about from wishing someone to have a good night and actually consciously meaning what you were saying. Now, however, it had just degenerated into the preconditioned subconsciously programmed appropriate phrase like good morning, goodbye, God bless you, and many more. So, in order to learn all about my own consciousness and subconscious, I needed to stop and think about these things and take opportunities like not saying a simple good night to help break the patterns and increase my awareness. I had a lot to learn about the mind still. I looked for a mat and couldn't find one. I was way too tired to panic or even ask anyone about it. So I found the nearest corner that was out of the way and just hit the floor. I was immediately out like a light. The next morning, I was awakened by Anastasia with a cheery smile and a cup of tea. I was still wiped out and groggily sat up. It seemed like I had just closed my eyes and lied down. Drink this, she said. What is it? It's tea, silly. It will make you feel better. I sipped some. It was terrible. What kind of tea is this? It's called mate. It's from Brazil and difficult to get. So don't turn your nose up to it so quickly. It tastes like old socks. It grows on you. So can the things on old socks, but that doesn't mean I want to drink them, she laughed. You'll soon appreciate it. It's the only drink we have right now that has caffeine in it. And it also seems to help adjust to the altitude. You allow caffeine here? One of her eyebrows raised in surprise. This isn't a rigid order. In fact, moderation in all things is a cornerstone of the order. Ah, caffeine. It tastes a little better now that I know that. I'm just exhausted, and I didn't sleep very well. I couldn't find the mat. Oh, you poor thing, she said so truly sympathetically. I didn't want to appear whiny or a wimp, so I responded with a proper mechanism. It's not the lack of the mat that was a problem. I understand, she said, patting me on the knee. I still remember a trip I took with my parents from here to India when I was a little girl. You're going to need a few days to recover, at least. That's why I let you sleep so long and brought you some tea. Sleep so long, it looks like the sun just came up. Yes, that's what I mean. We usually rise before the sun. Is that one of the rules? Most of us do that, but not all. Are there any basic rules here? Yes. Be kind. Don't hurt anyone. That's it? Surely there's more. Well, yes, of course. You have a lot to learn. So, what are the other rules? Well, you are supposed to get me tea every morning, she joked. Seriously? No, only if you want to. I don't mind. I'd be happy to do it. I was just teasing. I already get tea for myself and someone else in the morning. But thanks for the offer. You'll eventually get into the swing of things and get a schedule. Unless you have something to do otherwise, we get up with the rising energies of the earth before the sun. Do a few private morning meditation techniques and yoga, then have a morning meeting and a group meditation. One of the adept monks speaks afterwards. All monks have some kind of work to do around the monastery, and you'll have various meditations to learn and master that you'll be practicing at different times during the day. You'll probably spend some time every day reading the ancient teachings in the library, but your routine may be different. I don't know. It mainly depends on what your personal teacher thinks you need. Everyone is different, so they all need different things in order to learn and change. So your routine may be very different from mine. I hope not. She smiled again. So, what is my routine right now? I don't know. What do you mean? I thought you were going to get me into the groove of things here. Only to an extent. The rest, like I said, will be up to your personal teacher. Okay, so who's my teacher? I don't know. You don't know? She nodded affirmatively. This was getting a little ridiculous. It was starting to remind me of trying to get a straight answer out of a Zen master I had back home. So I tried to come at it from a different angle. But before I could, she spoke again. Only you can decide who your personal teacher will be, and ask them to be your teacher if you want to. Will you be my teacher? She laughed and said, I'm hardly qualified to be your teacher, but thank you anyway. I am honored. That was real sweet of you to ask. I already told you who my personal teacher is, and I can tell you what my basic schedule is. Would that help? She smiled. Anything would be welcomed, Anastasia. Are you a nun elder? A nun? Well, we are all the same here, whether male or female. You could call us monks or all nuns or all whatever. They're just words. Titles and ranks for a position don't matter. It doesn't really matter what you call anyone. It's what you are that counts, don't you think? Sometimes the label helps keep some things more organized in our silly little brains, but sometimes it can create false or unfair divisions and false worship where none is warranted. I guess I might be called a nun in certain orders, except I'm not fully celibate, which sometimes being a nun requires. So generally, we all consider ourselves just monks or students or teachers, depending on your capabilities and consciousness. Wait, back up for a second. Fully celibate? It seems like you either are or you aren't. I'll explain some other time. Anyway, some of us do call the adept female monks mothers, however, but it's because they kind of become like universal mothers when they are enlightened. It's more of a term of endearment than a title. Like I said, titles are really unimportant. You can call them sisters or chum for all they care. In the next few weeks, I developed quite a crush on Anastasia. I had never had a woman feeling so loving towards me. And because of what I was accustomed to as far as male-female relationships go, I thought that her affection meant that she liked me in a romantic sense also. I wasn't used to being loved so dearly without it meaning that she wanted to be with me. I didn't understand pure, real love yet. And I didn't have the consciousness to respond to her without selfish positiveness. Excuse me. That did not sound right. Without selfish possessiveness. It came it came as quite a shock and disappointment to me when I found out that she was not interested in me that way. It turned out that she actually already had a mate and she had a very good and close relationship with. She was just a loving, caring person. Just a loving, caring person, I said, as if it were common. Women who are truly spiritual, kind, and caring typically have quite a problem with men thinking about them the way I did with Anastasia. Actually, lusting after them would be a more accurate way to put it. Not just in a sexual sense, although that's certainly involved, but in a wanting their attention and affection way. So you might want to learn from my mistake and take some helpful advice. If you ever meet such a special, truly spiritual woman, don't make the same mistake. Just because a woman is warm, kind, and caring towards you doesn't mean she wants to be your possession or have romance or sex with you. This goes for all women, but it is especially true for women of advanced spiritual development. Just take the love you get. It's wonderful to even ever receive such love. And don't try to possess it for yourself alone or make that woman the center of your life. That's the role only God can fulfill. Bringing my story up to date in summary. As the day went by, I slowly adjusted to my new surroundings and began to absorb what I could. Years later, I finally graduated. Now, as was prophesied within our order centuries ago, this book was written to present the essential ancient teachings to the public in an unadulterated, clear, easily understandable fashion. Along with this, I will include some of my personal experiences, both ones that I had while I was a young novice student on my road to change, and a few of those that I had later in life after I became an initiate. That way, you can get a little glimpse of things from both sides, the teacher and student. Okay, that concludes chapter 2. Thank you for joining me for the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. I recommend everyone to get this book. It is great reading. Whether you want to read along, read it for yourself, or just get it for the meditations and energy techniques that are in this book is very, very valuable. And I highly suggest it. That is the reasons I'm reading this. I'm basically putting my money where my mouth is because I feel this book is that important. So thank you once again for joining me. And for that, I will say have a great day, and I will see you next time on the reading of Chapter 3 in The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Love and light.